Well, hello, good evening. I say good evening because that's for the people who do view this on live stream, because where you are in the world it might not be evening, but where we are and where most of the people who view our stream are, it is evening. So we'll just go ahead and get away with that little um, not necessarily true thing for you. So here we are, and it is another Friday. It is the first Friday of February for this year of 2024. And I just remembered something that I wanted to get up before I got started tonight. So I'm going to have to do it this way. So you can't see what I'm doing anyway. So I wanted to, that'll be my wife. I'll get her on here, put her on speakerphone where we can hear her. Good evening. You were muffled, but I think you said some sort of greeting there.
I said good evening.
Yeah. Well, this is up over here, so I'm going to go ahead and do a little zooming in preparation for this, and then we'll just go ahead and temporarily go into this mode. Now you can see here that I am on Google Earth, and you can sort of see the outline of upstate New York, Pennsylvania. You can see Long Island there. The place that I intend to go to is north of Long Island, up here in the state of Connecticut. Some of you may have heard of this. I just kind of stumbled across it in a YouTube video, and I found it kind of interesting and fascinating, and so I thought I'd go ahead and share it here. We are looking at New London, Connecticut. And in New London, Connecticut, there is a historic church building, historic structure, and I am zooming in on it here. You can see it, just kind of moved it where you can see more of it. And you see it's got a tall pointed steeple there. And I'm going to go ahead and go into street view here so that we can see this structure from the front. And we can also see the name of the congregation that meets in this historic structure. That's not just a title for an event here. That is the name of the congregation, Engaging Heaven. And as you can see, it is a lovely structure. There's a clock tower on it and a steeple, and way up there at the tip top, well, I just moved it behind where you couldn't see it. There is a gold globe, or gold colored anyway. I don't think it's actually made of gold, but this structure, and I'm not sure if it was this week or I know it was this month, that steeple toppled and caved in and took out the bulk of the roof behind it with it when it went down. And the YouTube structural integrity analyst that I ran across, and I think he showed up because I had watched his videos about the condominium collapse in Florida a couple of years ago. He had done some pretty in-depth videos on what had gone wrong there. And he was looking at this, and he had found video from a school building back of the other side of a parking garage from this structure that captured the collapse of the steeple. You couldn't see the roof of the church in that video, but you could see the steeple tilt. It actually started to fall and then began to tilt and fall backwards. It fell towards the roof of the building, and then collapsed down in there and essentially wiped out 3/4 of the roof of the main structure and just filled the interior of the building with rubble and debris. Fortunately, nobody was inside. Nobody got hurt in the incident. But yeah, and he was pointing out that this tower already had a lien, and I'm going to show you something else that he pointed out that may or may not be related. If you look at the steps going up to that central tower, the two side towers, by the way, survived this. They're still standing. They didn't cave in, and portions of the wall either side of this appear to still be there, although it's hard to tell with all the rubble. The other fascinating thing about this incident is that all the rubble stayed on church property. If I zoom back out here, you can see how close this church is to other buildings. There in New London, Connecticut, all the rubble from that steeple collapse managed to stay on church property. So,
Well, you wouldn't want a litter.
what'd you say?
They wouldn't want a litter.
They wouldn't want to litter.
Right.
Well, the other interesting thing was that he showed some pictures that had been taken of the site afterwards, and one of them appeared to have been taken either from through one of the windows of this building that I'm kind of showing with my cursor there, or from the roof of that building, and they were looking down inside the sanctuary where you couldn't tell it was a sanctuary because all of rubble and shattered wood and stuff on the floor. But in there you could see that golden globe from the peak of the steeple there. I have to move it over there where you can see it. Yeah. So that's just one of the interesting events that we ran across. I'm going to take this back this way for a moment, and I can go ahead and close that because you're not looking at it anymore. My wife had an appointment this week, and we got her all bundled up in the car and started going there because the appointment was in a different city. We had gone 12 or 15 miles, and it all of a sudden dawned on me that I hadn't done near enough work to have gotten to that point. And I got to thinking about what work I hadn't done. And the work that I hadn't done was that I had failed to go back in the house and get my wife's wheelchair and put it in the trunk of the car. We'd already noticed something else that we had missed, so at that point we stopped the car. You're fussing about something?
I said at that point I just had a meltdown.
Yeah, she didn't want to go to the appointment at that point, so we called and got it
Pain, difficulty breathing. I was ready to cry. I had a meltdown.
Yeah. So,
I can handle.
like I say, we called and got it rescheduled and came back home. So now she's got to go through all that getting ready and getting out of the car and stuff again to get to that appointment. But maybe it was a good thing because today I went and talked to somebody who told us some things we might ought to say to them when we do get to the appointment. So maybe it's nice that we got that happened. So quick programming note, we do have a sermon presentation prepared. In fact, I haven't even looked at it most of the week. I started on it Saturday last week and got it finished by sometime early Sunday morning. And I've gone through since then and proofread it once. I'll need to go through and do another proofreading run through it. And so for those of you who will join it live, it is at 11 Central Standard Time tomorrow. Now, unfortunately, for those of you who view this on YouTube, the sermon presentations won't be posted on the YouTube channel. So if you do happen to hear something about the sermon presentation and want to see it, you'll have to go to the Facebook group, In Vain Do They Worship Me, in order to see the sermon presentation. All we're going to upload to the YouTube channel are the Bible study videos.
Right.
You had a question?
What is your YouTube channel name?
I forget. I think I called it Friday Night Bible Study. Anyway. So, let's go over here and get this up and assume, not a good idea, but we're going to do it anyway, that we are ready to begin. So let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings, and we thank you for the week that is past, the trials and victories and so forth that we have been involved in. We thank you for the written word, but we thank you even more for the living word, Jesus Christ. We want to get to know him and you through our study of the written word this evening. So we ask that the Holy Spirit will come close to each receptive heart, that each individual might receive the blessing you intend for them. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So, two different ways to accomplish the same thing. I did it one way. I wasn't sure that it would work that way the other time, but I had the way I usually do it, so I did that this time, and it seems to have worked there. So, we are prepared, as you may have noticed in our subtitle, to cover the first human-on-human crime recorded in the Bible. It's also the first of what we might consider the most egregious human-on-human crime that it is possible to have.
Comment.
Go ahead.
I think the first recorded human-on-human crime was when Adam threw his wife under the bus.
Well, yeah. But in our system of justice, you couldn't be prosecuted for that. We might think it's not a good thing to do, but even in today's litigious society, it's highly unlikely you would be prosecuted for casting blame on your wife, particularly when there was a little bit of truth to the accusation. Granted, it was a case of self-justification primarily, but people do that all the time. So
because we're broken, serve self.
I just started. There's a delay between what you hear and what I hear, and I had just started to talk when you started, so the phone muffled you. Try it again.
It's because we're programmed. It's our nature to preserve self.
Exactly. Which is the point that we were making last week as we were covering chapter 3. That's about all we got done last week. And that is that just as soon as the man and the woman ate the fruit, whatever that symbol might have actually meant they did, the point is they believed the serpent's lies. They began to distrust God. And just as soon as that happened, then the need to protect self hopped in and took control. So, and the version that we read from here, the New Living Translation, as we point out very, very often, is highly interpretive. So it doesn't read here the way the Hebrew reads. They have worked their way through the euphemisms that the Hebrews used, and so they render chapter 4, verse 1 as, now Adam had sexual relations with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant. Now, they've got a footnote there for Adam, and that's because Adam is just the Hebrew for the man. And so throughout the Bible, he never gets a name.
I'll be back in a minute when I quit sneezing.
Okay. Yeah, throughout the book of Genesis, he never has a name. He's always just the man. We have turned it into a name because as a culture, we are so affixed on names. It's a very big deal when you have when a man and a woman have a child and the child is born. That's the point at which we expect it to receive a name, and it is the duty of the parents to provide that name. And it can be a big deal. It can actually be the source of controversy within families when it comes to naming a child. That's how fixated we are in our culture, and that's throughout all human cultures, on a verbal label for an individual, that's all a name is. Now, we have pointed out that in the Bible, the name represents the character, and to God, that's what's important about a person, is the character, not the verbal label that we apply to somebody. So up until the end of chapter 3, neither the man nor the woman had a verbal label. They were just the man and the woman. Well, then we read where God said that it wasn't good for the man to be alone. So he brings all the animals to see what he would call them. When he got done naming all the animals, there wasn't a suitable helper found for him, and so the woman was created. Then at the end of chapter 3, after God confronts the man and the woman over what happened when they believed the serpent's lies, Adam gives his wife a name. He does to her what he'd already done to the animals. So now she's Eve. Now, of course, what the Hebrew reads for chapter 4, verse 1 is that Adam knew his wife, Eve, and she became pregnant. But that's the meaning. That's what they meant with know. They meant to know intimately. And many people have pointed to this text when they get to a text out of the New Testament, such as Jesus saying, "Depart from me, I never knew you. I never had an intimate relationship with you." It was always just, you called my verbal label my name, but you never got to know my character, and so on and so forth. Anyway, she became pregnant, and it says, when she gave birth to Cain, that's the name she gave him, she said, with the Lord's help, I have produced a man. And there's a footnote for the word produced there, and it says, I have acquired. And then they say that Cain sounds like a Hebrew term that can mean either produce or acquire. So we have the first two names in the Bible, Eve and now Cain. And then it says later she gave birth to his brother and named him Abel. Now, there are interpreters who point to this last part of verse 1 and suggest that Eve had heard the promise of God about the serpent's seed and her seed, and about the distrust and enmity, the King James word, that God would place between the woman and the serpent, and ultimately between humanity and the individual that the serpent represented. And so they suggest that when she gave birth to Cain, she saw him as the promised seed that would provide deliverance from the mess the man and the woman had landed themselves in when they believed the serpent's lies. Now, if that's the case, then she may have laid quite a burden of expectation on her firstborn son. And when we say she, probably her husband had a hand to play in this as well. He may have believed the same thing that he did. So, he goes on to say, when they grew up, Abel became a shepherd, while Cain cultivated the ground. Now, whatever you want to believe about producing clothing, the first need that they would have had was for food. So it makes sense that the first son would have been assigned the task of cultivating the ground. Remember, that was part of the changes to the earth that God warned them about when he confronted them after they believed the serpent's lies and acted on that belief. That God had said, you're going to have to work hard to get food from the ground. And so that began, and agriculture began. And so the very first son becomes an agriculturalist. He cultivates the ground. He raises food. Now, again, whatever you believe about how they went about getting clothing from the sheep, we assume sheep because of the term shepherd here. And let me just look that up in a different version to see if a different version also says shepherd there. It doesn't say shepherd, okay, but it does mention flocks, and that's kind of an assumption we'll make about flocks is when we use the term flocks, we're not talking about cattle, we're talking about usually sheep and goats. The more literal version says, Abel was the keeper of the flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So it actually turns yeah, okay. I've got it in the same order here. So once they had the need for food met, then the next need they had was for clothing. And sheep, but goats as well, provided clothing through their hair coats. We shear sheep and get wool, but you also have goat hair clothing. Didn't John the Baptist wear? No, he didn't wear goat hair. He wore camel's hair coat, didn't he?
I think so.
Yeah, but yeah, goat hair is a little rougher, a little coarser than wool, but both can get used. So with the first son, they met the need for food. With the second son, they met the need for clothing, suggesting that later sons would have become experts in construction, meeting the need for shelter. Now, how much they needed shelter in those days, that's another question that I don't think we're going to get into here because it doesn't really get mentioned. We might deal with that some a little bit later. But at any rate, we have these two professions or specializations taking place. Now, the next question we might want to address is how much time passes here. How long was it between the man and the woman being created and to the point where they had this confrontation with the serpent? Are you still there?
I'm here.
Okay, my phone had gone dark, so I couldn't see. So, who knows how long that was? We have absolutely no indication in the biblical record. That it probably wasn't that long, given the logic of the situation and the idea that the serpent or the angel, and some of the angels have names that are similar to the name for serpent. We discovered that when we were studying the story of Moses. The serpent would not have waited really long to make his move to try and regain control of the planet, if indeed that's one of his motivations. That's just an interpretation. What his motive might have been, we don't know for sure. But at any rate, we don't think he would have waited long to get involved and try to upset things on this planet. So it probably wasn't all that long, maybe a year or two, before from the time of creation, as discussed in chapters 1 and 2, and the confrontation over the tree of knowledge of good and evil, recorded in chapter 3. However, again, we have no idea how long it was. It probably wasn't that long. Well, we do have some indication because, and let me just look ahead a little bit here, when it talks about the descendants of the man, it says that he was 130 years old, and we're not told exactly from what point that age is calculated. Most interpreters believe it's probably the point of the fall in chapter 3, that the years of the man and the woman are counted as starting at that point. So, if we are to believe that things happened in the order that this account puts them, then Seth was born after the events of this chapter. So this would have been within the first 130 years after the fall. We know it had to be sometime, because it would have had to have been at least 9 months after Adam knew his wife that Cain would have been born, and then at least another 9 to 10 or more months before the next man was born. And if what I believe about the Old Testament holds true, that for the most part the birth of females is not mentioned, who knows if the first child born was actually Cain, or if in fact a girl preceded him and she's just not mentioned, or if there might have been a girl between Cain and Abel. Again, we don't know. We are quite certain that Adam and Eve had girls, that the couple had girls, but otherwise the race wouldn't have continued. But at any rate, so then we get to verse 3, and it says, when it was time for the harvest, Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. Abel also brought a gift, the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flock. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but he did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. Now, the usual interpretation that my wife and I were brought up with is that it was the gift itself that was the problem here. That Cain's gift was not an animal sacrifice, so to speak. And we assume that it was a sacrifice because it talks about the best portions, or in the fascinating thing that takes place in these interpretive translations. I'm going to read this from a more literal translation, verse 4. And Abel, on his part, also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. And let's see if it goes on and says, but for Cain and for his offering he had no regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Now, it's fascinating how these more interpretive versions, even including the NIV. The NIV is a little bit interpretive. It's not nearly as interpretive as the New Living Translation that we've got open here. But let me turn to a passage in Isaiah and just show you how they have changed it because of cultural bias. Isaiah 55, verse 2, why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is good, and your soul will delight in the richest of fare, F-A-R-E, the richest food. Well, why would they put it there? Well, what do the more literal translations say? And again, I'm going to go to this New American Standard Bible and look up Isaiah 55 and read you verse 2 out of it, as soon as I find it here. Getting close. There we are. Why do you spend money for what is not bread, and your wages for what does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourself in abundance. So even the New American Standard Bible succumbed to cultural bias in rendering that verse. So let's go back to the King James, because I have looked this verse up and I know what Hebrew is used there, what word is actually being used, and we'll read it out of Isaiah and we'll see the cultural bias that has crept into these translations. Again, I'm having trouble getting the pages separated here. Verse 2 out of King James Version. Wherefore do ye spend money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which satisfieth not? Hearken diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good, and the that which is italicized, meaning they stuck those words in there to make it make sense and let your soul delight itself in, do you know what it says?
No, but what's coming to mind is this do in remembrance of me.
Okay. Let your soul delight itself in fatness.
In what?
Fatness.
Oh,
Okay. Now, we were just reading there, and we see that same cultural bias entering into translations of this verse, verse 4 in Genesis 4, when it says the best portions. It was the fat portions. Now, I can remember a certain medical person who spent a lot of time preaching, coming to a place that I was able to hear him spout his stuff, and he was going on about how God had told the Jews, and this was his version of it, please don't eat the fat. Well, what passages in the Old Testament does he get that ban on eating fat? Well, it's out of the book of Leviticus, which is the book that tells the Hebrews how to go about their system of worship. The Levites were the priests of the Hebrew nation. That's based on the events at the golden calf, or surrounding the golden calf. So, Levi, the tribe of Levi, Leviticus, is the book that talks about the operation of the Hebrew worship system that was overseen by the tribe of Levi, the Levites. So, and there, and then for people who want to think that way, let me just take you through a little kind of a verbal experiment here. When the Hebrews brought their gifts to God, their sacrifices, and they did offer fruits, and there were grain offerings and drink offerings, so all of these things could be offered and were accepted by God, so that in itself puts the kibosh on this idea that Cain brought the wrong kind of offering, because the people did bring produce offerings and they were accepted by God, so that wasn't the problem, despite what some people want to say. But when you brought a gift to God, what did you bring? Did you bring the groundfall fruits? Did you bring the sick and the lame animals? What did you say?
brought your best.
You brought the very best. The part that you would keep for yourself. And so, what part of the animal did God reserve to himself when they brought a fellowship offering?
The fat.
Yeah. So, on that logic then, what part of the animal is the best part? Wouldn't it be the fat? And that's why, because we have in our culture so denigrated fat and obesity. We think it's a terrible thing. It is a health problem, by the way. But we think it's a terrible thing, and we have a tendency to shame people who are overweight. And this has become so strongly ingrained in our culture that when we read a Bible text that says in the original language, let your soul delight itself in fatness, well, you can't word it that way. That would be objectionable. So we'll put it richest of fare. Or in this case, instead of the fat portions from the firstborn lambs of his flock. We call it the best portions. It was the fat. Now, that does suggest that by this time, the humans had begun offering animal sacrifices in the sense of actually killing an animal to offer it to God. Now, if they were killing animals, were they already eating animals?
Are you aware of one of the natural treatments for high blood sugar?
Well, one of the natural treatments for high blood sugar is to eat fat. The fat will knock your blood sugar down in a hurry.
That's right. I've seen it happen. If mine goes up, I can eat butter, real butter.
Yeah, probably not the most pleasant meal, but
it's kind of difficult to do to eat a stick of butter, but it's not something you sit and do all at once. You take a little pat at a time and kind of let it melt in your mouth, and a few hours later, your blood sugar will be down.
Yeah.
Also, another thing is put butter in your black coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, black, because otherwise you...
Stay away from. It's a sin. I don't find that in the Bible.
No.
And what I found is that if it's going to have health benefits, I don't think God would keep something from us that's going to have a protective measure for us, unless we know it's poisonous. But
well, yeah, but here's the point, and really these interpretive translations are making this point for us because the Hebrew does say it was the fat portions. They're calling it the best portions. Well, yeah, the fat portions are the best portion of it. They're the most delectable when we eat. So, but again, going on to the main point here. That's just kind of a side point we got into. The main point we're making is that it wasn't the gift itself that was a problem. So we have to assume then that the issue was the attitude with which it was brought. Now, we have heard this interpretation based on something we've already said this evening about the attitude with which Cain presented his gift at the time of harvest. And that is that his mother, and possibly his father also, believed that he might be the seed of the woman promised back there in chapter 3, that he would be the one to rescue humanity from the mess it found itself in. And there was a surmise that, well, if the problem was we ate the fruit and God got mad at us because we stole his fruit, then maybe what we need to do to alleviate the problem, to satisfy God, is to give him back the fruit that we stole from him. Maybe that will assuage his grief and get him to like us again. That's a possible interpretation of what's going on here and why Cain's offering wasn't accepted, because he wasn't offering it out of gratitude. He was offering it hoping to buy something for himself.
He was trying to fix God.
Yeah. So, In other words, and we've used this terminology in the past, haven't run across it recently, but we have used it in the past. Uh, the interaction with God in Cain's case was transactional rather than relational. And we've talked about that difference in people's approach to God. Some people have a transactional approach to God and a transactional understanding of the atonement of Christ. We give God something He wants in order to get God to give us something we want. That's a transaction. We're buying it. And that is based in part on the human cultural fixation on commerce as the way of life.
Will that fit in the teaching, claim the promises?
Well, I am sure that there are a lot of people.
Hey God, you promised that you would do this if I would do this. I've done it, so now you have to do it. Doesn't matter whether or not you know it's good for me or not. I demand you give it to me.
Well, yeah, that's clearly a transactional approach, isn't it? Rather,
And thinking out there, claim the promises.
oh yeah. What was it? The ABCs of prayer: ask, believe, claim.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty highly transactional. So there is this possibility. When we're not going to say this is what this absolutely means, but there is a possibility that the difference between Cain and Abel here is that Abel's gift was more relational, while Cain's gift was transactional. So God accepted Abel and his gift. Abel wanted a relationship with God, with his creator. And so the creator gave him what he wanted. Cain thought he had to buy access to God. He didn't want a relationship. He wanted to be in control. Well, yeah, when that's part of the transactional nature of relating to other people. When it's transactional, then we have an expectation that we will get what we want because of the nature of the transaction. There's something.
And let it be said right here that we share our experience in our Bible studies and in our knowledge of God without ever asking you to give us a single penny.
Right.
You don't have to purchase your way to have a relationship with the Lord.
No, and in fact, when you try to do that purchase mindset, that transactional mindset, actually gets in the way of you finding acceptance and relationship with God.
Now, what we do isn't free because there is that website involved. However, and it's automatically pulled out of my credit card. When it comes time to pay it, there's always room on that card to pay it.
Yeah.
So I'm not complaining. I'm not asking. God is providing.
Yeah. Well, part of the expense of this is in order for us to stream like this, we have to have an internet connection. That's a monthly fee. We have bought computer equipment in part to be used in these streaming presentations. But
it's what we want to do.
It's what we want to do. And God has provided. We have these things. We're not in debt. So we can use them for this purpose. And we don't need to be asking people to support us. We don't need that. That's all been taken care of.
Yeah, you may not like that we don't have fancy equipment, but we're not working for it.
No, this is not. This is not a professional production. This is a couple of people who want to share what they believe about God with others.
Welcome to our living room.
Yeah. So, verse 5, he did not accept Cain and his gift, and this made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected, or his face fell. Now, sometimes we think that God came and talked to Cain just once, but actually, he did it twice. Didn't we do a sermon presentation on this chapter a year or so ago? I think we did.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, there are actually two confrontations. So the first one takes place right here. As soon as Cain gets upset, God comes and talks to him. Now, another bit of mythology that we were raised with was, how did God indicate his acceptance of these offerings? The Hebrew text doesn't say. People have surmised that God accepted Abel's offering by sending fire to consume it, something that he didn't do for Cain's offering. Maybe, may not be. Our God is a consuming fire. If God's presence showed up, it might have appeared to be a fire, and it might indeed have consumed the offering being offered. That's a possibility. But it doesn't say here what happened.
If fire consumes sin, then it's possible that God acted to heal Abel of something, and Cain got mad about it.
Well, yeah.
He could no longer use it to pick on his brother.
Yeah, Cain had... Abel received the benefit of a connection with his Creator that Cain did not receive. And however the two of them knew it, Cain did know it, and it made him mad. And that's, again, a very natural human reaction. God created us to be angry. Anger is an emotion that God designed to be part of our being. Now, he didn't design us to get into a rage over selfish things like we humans so often do. He didn't design us to be controlled by our rage. He designed us to be in control of our emotions. But he did give us that emotion. So Cain now is misusing an emotion that was given to him by being angry over what he perceives. I'm not saying it was. He perceives as a slight to himself. So rather than being angry because somebody else was being slighted, he's slighted. Can't think of another term right now. He's being angry over his own loss. What was that you said?
Favored.
Favored, okay, yeah. Well, favored, slighted is the opposite of favored.
Yeah, he was angry because somebody was being favored in a way that he was not.
Yeah. Ain't fair. You did it for him, but you didn't do it for me. So the God asked him, and again, what else did you get for Christmas? You may not have been able to hear that. Somebody just spun his tires. Somebody just spun his tires on the street out in front of our house. Well, I don't remember where I first heard that. Have you heard that?
I don't think it is.
Have you ever heard that saying before? What else did you get for Christmas?
No.
Yeah, I heard that years ago when somebody was showing off their vehicle in that kind of a way. It's like, yeah, okay, you're showing off. What else did you get for Christmas? Anyway, so God confronts Cain, just like he confronted the man and the woman earlier. And how does he do it? He asks questions. Teachers are trained when they're dealing with misbehaving children. The best way to approach the situation is to ask the child questions. Engage the frontal cortex. If the child's misbehaving, it's likely that they have been triggered. And evolution, the evolutionary development of the human being, has shut down the frontal cortex for survival purposes. So, in order to bring the child down from that, you need to find a way to engage the frontal cortex, to get the thinking part of the brain back operating. So God does this with Cain, and he asks him a question. Why are you so angry? The Lord asked Cain. Why do you look so dejected? Or why is your face downcast? Then he goes on to make a statement. You will be accepted if you do what is right. But if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you.
But that does not mean be sure to follow the list of rules.
No. No, it is not.
Right would be make sure to keep your connection with your Creator active, close, personal, intimate.
Well, when it's talking about doing what is right here, it's talking about the reality of the situation, what is right in reality, rather than what is right in the artificial approach to living that we humans have developed, which involves written rules and systems and so on and so forth. So, God tells Cain something that should have been pretty obvious to begin with. This is not rocket science, so to speak. You will be accepted if you do what is right. If you approach me with the attitude that you want to get to know me, then you will be accepted. But if you refuse that, if you continue in your transactional approach to me, sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you. And we have talked about that oftentimes as we went through the New Testament. We looked at the places where it talks about sin as addiction, sin as a controlling force in our lives that makes us powerless to deal with it. So God is telling Cain here, if you get caught up in sin, it's going to be in charge, it's going to be in control. So you need to subdue it and be its master. You need to be in control of your own life. Don't be reaching out trying to control somebody else. Control yourself.
Don't let somebody else control you.
How's that?
And don't let somebody else control you.
Well, no. I mean, that should be obvious. If the point is to control yourself, then that's the point for everybody. You know, what's sauce for the goose kind of a thing. So everybody needs to be focused on controlling themselves. And if they get caught up trying to control other people, then they're not controlling themselves. Now, this is interesting, and I haven't seen this in other translations. One day, Cain suggested to his brother, let's go out into the fields. Footnote C, as in the Samaritan Pentateuch, Greek, and Syriac versions, and the Latin Vulgate. the Masoretic text lacks, let's go out into the fields. Okay, Mia, I need to see what's under you. Get back to Genesis chapter 4 here in the King James Version. Okay, King James says, and Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field. All right, so the field is mentioned, but it's later. It's not in what Cain said to his brother. Looking here in the New American Standard Bible, and Cain told Abel his brother, and it came about when they were in the field. Okay, so it just says he told him. And since I'm looking through different versions, let's go ahead and read that here in the NIV. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. And then they footnote that. So it depends on what versions you read. It appears that let's go out into the fields got added later, that the original Hebrew, such as the Masoretic text, does not have that. I mean, it makes sense that he would say that, but I like that version where it says Cain told his brother. He doesn't say specifically what he said. It just says he told his brother. Well, what did he tell his brother? Well, he may have told his brother about this interaction between him and God. He may have told his brother that he was upset because his brother's sacrifice was accepted and his was not. Gift, I say sacrifice. Gift, sacrifice, whatever. Yeah, same thing. So, then, reading the rest of verse 8, and while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Now, some people have suggested that the death of Abel was not Cain's intention. He was just acting out of his rage, out of his anger, and he wanted to hurt him, and he lost control. And when he got done, there was his brother dead. And, he ended up being kind of surprised by it. I would go on to suggest that in a lot of the murders that happen in our day, something very similar has taken place. There are cases where it is pretty clear from the evidence that the murderer laid in wait and intended to kill. But there's a lot of cases, I think, where somebody gets into a rage, loses control, their rational brain gets shut down through the mechanisms we've already talked about, the mechanisms that evolution has put in place in our brains. And
Can I tell a story?
Just a moment, let me finish my sentence and I'll ask you. Now that the rational brain is shut down, the emotional brain is in control, the rage gets acted out, and only after the victim is dead does the rational brain kick in, and then it's busy looking for an excuse. I've just done something I shouldn't have done. How can I absolve myself of responsibility for the mess I've created? Okay, what were you wanting to say?
Not long after we moved here, I was out in the yard pruning one of the plants out in the flower bed, and one of the neighbors came by in her handicap scooter.
Yeah?
And she saw what I was doing, and she stopped, and she asked me if I knew what I was doing, and I said no. And she had a green thumb, and she told me how to do what I was trying to do. And it worked. and I don't remember what she told me, and it's not important. But we got into a discussion. Yeah, we stood there. I stood there and talked to her for a long time. I couldn't invite her in because she was not able to walk, and she was in her scooter, and I didn't have a wheelchair for her, and couldn't get the scooter in the house. So I just stood out there, and we talked for about an hour. And she told me where she lived. She's one of our neighbors. And she raised German Shepherds. And she trained German Shepherds to be police dogs.
Okay, are you talking about after we moved into this house?
Yeah.
Okay, I know which house you're talking about that because you told me about that.
Yep.
Okay.
So we had two dogs that she was working with, two grown German Shepherds that she was working with, and they were in the house with her. And she was in a wheelchair, and somebody broke in, and he was angry, and he was ready to kill her. He had a knife. And the dogs saw him, and they went on they took the stance and snarled,
Yeah.
growled on their teeth. And she told the man, just stand still and they won't hurt you. He came after her anyway.
Mm-hmm.
She thought that he was going to bleed to death before she could get an ambulance there.
Wow.
He lost his daddy bits.
The dogs bit him where it hurt.
The dogs took him down. Yeah. Now, he was acting to harm her because he could get into her house. She was not really by herself able to defend herself, and he needed money for drugs.
Yeah.
In his right mind, would he have harmed her? I don't know.
Yeah, well. But, and that's kind of what is hinted at there in verse 7. When God confronted Cain, God knew what could happen. And so he goes to Cain and gives him a warning. If you don't take control of what's going on, if you let sin that's crouching at the door take over and control you, something terrible is going to happen. You must subdue it and be its master. Well, we know now he failed to subdue it at some point. And when all was said and done, his brother lay there dead.
And that man that attacked that woman lay on the kitchen floor bleeding to death.
Yeah. I assume they were able to save his life.
Yeah. But he never had any more children.
Yeah, well, I guess he gets a Darwin Award then, doesn't he?
Well, I think you have to die to get the Darwin Award.
No, you just have to remove yourself from the gene pool.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, so he was eligible. Whether or not anybody nominated him for it, he would have been eligible if that's what happened. But going on here, so we have this first murder, and then we get the second confrontation between the Creator and the first son. Let's call him the first son. That's fairly likely true given what we can know about it here. So afterward, the Lord asked Cain, "Where is your brother?" Where is Abel? Well, I don't know, Cain responded. Am I my brother's guardian? Am I supposed to keep track of where he is? Now, again, as we've already noted, God does the same thing he's already done. He comes to Cain and he engages his rational brain by asking a question. Where's your brother? Well, what's the answer? His brother isn't anymore. There's no where to him. He's dead. There's no thought taking place. The body has ceased to function. Without any thought, there's no soul. There is no brother there anymore. Huh?
We lie to God about it. I didn't do anything.
Well, yeah, that's the typical response of perpetrators when they get caught. What are you arresting me for? I haven't done nothing.
Like the guy who shot the man in the head in the house next door to us. And our neighbor across the street was a county coroner.
Yeah.
And he was sitting in his car watching the whole thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He was the one that called the police and reported it.
Yeah.
And they got the guy that did the shooting, and they brought him to the coroner to watch, to keep an eye on him while they went to get the rest of the people.
Yeah.
And the guy's claiming, I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
The coroner who had just sat there and watched him do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like we live in a rough town, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it's probably that way just about everywhere in the world these days. So we've talked about how God is trying to engage Cain's rational mind to get him to think clearly again by asking a question. Where's your brother? And we've just suggested the answer is, well, there's no where to give any answer. All we've got now is a body. But how does Cain respond?
I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?
Yeah. Who made me the one to watch out for him? I don't know where he went. Well, is that true? No, Cain knew exactly what had happened to Abel. But he is refusing to accept responsibility for what he's done. But God doesn't let him get away with it. But the Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now, is that literally true? No. It's a symbolic way for God to say, what have you done? Don't lie to me. I know what you've done.
You've taken something that I treasured away from me.
Yeah.
Taken away from me somebody that I love. What have you done?
Yeah. God knew what had happened. Now, maybe Cain hadn't had it drilled into him like a lot of us had, that God sees everything you do and God knows everything you do. So maybe he actually had some sense that he could try to hide what had happened from God, but God's now making it clear. I know what's happened. When he's talking,
from his parents, he tried to hide in the garden hide from God in the garden when
yeah, mm-hmm.
they were naked.
Right. And we don't know how Cain went about causing the death of his brother. But let's suppose he did it by asphyxiation. which is possible, when you kill somebody through asphyxiation, choking them to death essentially, no blood is literally spilled. But throughout human history, blood has become the representation of the life. So, however Abel died, the symbolic sense is that his blood is on Cain's hands. That's one sense that we would use it. It's on the ground, so to speak. And that cries out to God because God knows. And then he says, and I'm thinking we might ought to understand this similarly to how we understood what God said to the man and the woman in chapter 3. Now you are cursed and banished from the ground which has swallowed your brother's blood. No longer will the ground yield crops for you, no matter how hard you work. From now on, you will be a homeless wanderer on the earth. And I want to read that bit about the ground because I think that's going a little farther than the actual text. Okay, NIV says, now you are under a curse and driven from the ground which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. New American Standard Bible. And now you are cursed from the ground which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. And King James Version, and now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened up her, get this thing to turn a single page, mouth, to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. So in the original language, the sense that he wouldn't be able to get any crops to grow isn't explicit. It just says the ground won't yield its strength. Your agricultural pursuits will not be as effective in the future as they used to be. And this bit about him being a homeless wanderer, well, how could Cain expect to face his parents after he had deprived them of their child? My guess is that since they were in fact sinners at this point, that the man and the woman, Adam and Eve, if you wish, would have had a very difficult time forgiving their eldest son. And that's emotional response that Cain could relate to. And he could see that it would not be comfortable to live there with his mother and father any longer. And so God tells him, you're not going to be comfortable here. You're going to have to go wandering about on the earth. Wherever you can find. You won't be coming back here because you won't be comfortable in their presence. And they may not forgive you, and I'm not going to make them. We might kind of read that into what's going on here. Cain replied to the Lord, "My punishment is too great for me to bear. You have banished me from the land and from your presence. You have made
Talk
me..."
about that forgiveness thing for a minute.
Let me finish the verse and we will, yes. "You have banished me from the land and from your presence. You have made me a homeless wanderer. Anyone who finds me will kill me." All right, you wanted to talk about this forgiveness thing.
We have a misconception of what forgiveness is.
Well, forgiveness does not mean trust. Clearly, even if Adam and Eve did find a way to forgive Cain, they would not still trust him.
Forgiveness is something you do for yourself.
Right. Nor should they be expected to trust him.
If you hold a grudge, you're physically harming yourself.
Yeah.
Forgiveness does not mean restored relationship. It does not mean restored trust. It doesn't mean that your memory has been erased. It doesn't mean that the deed is undone. It means you've let go of the grudge and you no longer allow it to harm you.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that it's our job to exact vengeance in our human terms.
Right.
It may mean that the relationship is severed and may need to remain severed.
Right. Particularly if the guilty party isn't interested in restoring the relationship and in remedying the personal problems that led to the action that caused the harm. Because there's a lot of people, they'll tell you they're sorry, but what they're sorry for is that you don't like them anymore, not that they have done what they have done. And we're going to see that.
You make me think of the boy that got in trouble at school. And I will probably tell the story wrong, but his mom got called because he had been called into the principal's office and she needed to get over there and visit with the principal. And when she got there, her son and two other boys and a couple of mothers, two other mothers were there. And she found out that her son was being accused of beating up another kid, which surprised her because her son was not combative at all. And when they got to hear the story, what was going on, I'll say boy A, boy B, boy C. Boy A was a bully.
Mm-hmm.
And he was constantly bullying boy B. And boy B was unable to do anything to protect himself. But boy C was bigger and did not like what was going on. So he got involved and told boy A to cut it out. Boy A continued to be a bully to boy B. So boy C stepped in and beat up boy A.
Mm-hmm.
In the face of boy B. And when they apologize to boy A, or else he was going to be going on suspension. And he said, and if I refuse to apologize, and the principal said, then you'll be going on suspension. So he looks over at boy C, and he says, I'm sorry, he looked at boy B, the victim,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, I am sorry that you got beat up. And you have my promise that if it ever happens again, and he looks over at boy A, I'll take care of it. He promised. I mean,
He apologized.
and he got away with it. Principal didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
I forgot why I talked about that. Why did I bring that up?
Well, we were talking about forgiveness. And about forgiveness does not mean restored trust.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I hit you. Does not mean I'm really sorry.
Right. Yeah.
It means I was forced to say it.
Yeah. Or I'm not happy with the consequences of what I've done. Will you bail me out a little bit?
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you I'm sorry. Again, transactional relationship going on here. What can I do to convince you to be nice to me after I've harmed you? So we're now reading Cain's response to what God has told him in verses 11 and 12, when he's told him what are going to be the natural consequences of what he's done. So Cain now replies to the Lord, my punishment is too great for me to bear. And there's a footnote there. Let's scroll down and see what it says about that. My sin. That's interesting. Let's look at some other versions here. See how they render it. Well, the New American Standard Bible just says punishment. The NIV says my punishment. I'd have to take some time to look that up and see what the Hebrew is being used there. I'm fairly certain that the King James is going to say punishment there as well, which tells us something about Cain's mindset, that God has just told him, here's what's going to happen, and Cain is assuming that it's punishment. Yeah, the King James does say punishment there. So he's assuming that it's punishment, but let's read the next verse to see what he's reading into what God has said, what he is hearing that God hasn't said, at least the way the account is rendered to us. You have banished me from the land and from your presence. You have made me a homeless wanderer. Anyone who finds me will kill me. So he's projecting onto God as the cause of his situation, rather than looking to himself as the cause of his situation. And again, that's very typical for humans who misbehave. They begin to think that their problems are the fault of the people imposing punishment on them, and not a problem of their own choices and actions.
And they blame God. What is this that God has done unto me?
Yeah.
I heard that recently.
We
Somebody
have.
was looking seems to me.
We have suggested here, Cain says in verse 14, you have banished me from the land and from your presence. God didn't banish him from the land. He just said, the progression of sin in this world means that the land is not going to produce the way it used to, the way you're accustomed to. Something he'd already told Adam, or the man, in chapter 3. So now we see him saying, it's going to get even worse, Cain. And this is...
God withdrew his protection.
Yeah.
And then that allowed evil forces to step in and introduce things into the land that God did not create.
Yeah. So, he's making an assumption here in verse 14. God's banished him from the land. Well, his own actions have brought that about. And then he says, and from your presence. Well, why would Cain not have the presence of God? Would it be because God was avoiding him, or because Cain was avoiding God because he was uncomfortable in the presence of the Creator? In other words, we're asking, did God not want to have anything to do with Cain from here on out? Or did God want to have a continued relationship with Cain? And it was Cain's choices that separated him from the divine presence.
I'm thinking of Lee Benden, I believe, who tells that in his seminars, sometimes he will get up and talk to people about just use your imagination and imagine that there's a door with a room on the right side of the sanctuary and a door with a room on the left side of the sanctuary. Now, if I were to tell you that the Father is in the door on the right side and Jesus is in the door on the left side, which door are you going to go through? And most people will respond, they're going to go into the room with Jesus. And when he asks why they don't want to go see the Father, it's because they're afraid of him.
Mm-hmm. And yet the point that we make from time to time in this group is that Jesus is just like the Father.
If you're afraid of the Father, it's because you don't know him.
Yeah. You can feel as comfortable in the presence of the Father as you can in the presence of Jesus. There's no difference between them. Now, the very last sentence there in verse 14 is something else that Cain adds that God did not say to him. Anyone who finds me will kill me. Now, we know that in today's society and culture, the expectation is if somebody murders, if someone commits murder, they should be killed themselves. We mentioned last week that the state of Alabama executed somebody by nitrogen hypoxia. And I noticed a headline that Ohio is proposing to do the same thing. There is this expectation that murder should meet the punishment of the death penalty. And that goes all the way back to right here. Here's the first mention of it. And it's not something that God said, it's something that Cain has assumed on his own. Why would he think this? Well, he has crossed the line. He has himself killed someone, and he knows himself well enough to know that if it was his loved one that died and somebody else did it, he would want to kill that person. So if that's the... Huh?
He's projecting his own character onto somebody else.
Yeah. And so, given that understanding of himself, he expects that others would be the same, and he may not be wrong about that, given human nature. Anyone who finds me will kill me. I have to get out of here before somebody does to me what I did to my brother. Of course, they're all brothers and sisters or mom and dad at this point, and he may have projected this, that mom and dad might actually be out to kill him. The Lord replied, "No, for I will give a sevenfold punishment to anyone who kills you." Or I think the more literal versions, if anyone kills Cain, he will be avenged 7 times. Therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. Now, if God is talking about vengeance, what do you think he means?
Healing.
Ah.
He's going to double down on the healing.
Well, more than double down. What's the number here?
7.
Yeah.
Perfection.
Okay. So, he will be avenged, a literal reading, 7 times. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain to warn anyone who might try to kill him. Now, was that literal or not? We don't know, it doesn't say. So Cain left the Lord's presence and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And footnote here for that, Nod means wandering. So...
Which brings to question, what was Lamech thinking?
Well, why did you get to that? We haven't gotten there yet.
Well, if Cain be avenged 7 times, then I will be avenged 77 times.
Well, we let's keep reading and we'll get there. So Cain settled, and we might put that in quotes, because if it's in the land of Nod, or the land of wandering, Cain was the world's first nomad, perhaps. He left agriculture because he didn't feel he could be successful at it any longer. God had said that the ground would not yield good crops for him, so if it's not going to work, why bother? So he became a wanderer, collecting what grew naturally on the earth and going from place to place to collect it.
The progenitor of the gypsies. Did I use that word right?
Well, yeah. I'm not sure that gypsy is the best term, because the correct terminology for people who live by moving about is nomad.
Oh, pardon me.
So I was just saying.
What word I need to be using? I don't know.
You were muffled. Try it again. Hello?
Hello?
I said you were muffled. Try it again.
I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
I think I apologize for saying gypsy, because it might be politically incorrect and I'm not aware. I don't know.
Well, the and I'm trying to think of the term uh, for the there is a race of people in Europe that got called gypsies, and they were nomadic. They did wander, so it's not entirely out of place to do that. But the term gypsy, I think, is generally considered a little bit politically incorrect.
Well, I do apologize.
But anyway,
I didn't know any better.
so Cain left the Lord's presence, settled in the land of wandering. He became a wanderer, and that's what God had said, a homeless wanderer. You will move about. He knew, God knew the character with which he had created humans. He knew what would be the natural results of the events that have been described here in chapter 4. So he knows that Cain is going to feel uncomfortable any place he settles and will keep moving. Now it says he went east of Eden. We don't know where Eden was. Eden at that point was probably just wherever the man and the woman ended up settling as they started having children. Now, verse 17 starts a new section. It says Cain had sexual relations with his wife, or in the King James, yeah, it says the same thing. Cain knew his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Then Cain founded a city, which he named Enoch after his son. Enoch had a son named Irad. Irad became the father of Mehujael. Mehujael became the father of Methushael. Methushael became the father of Lamech. So we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations after Cain, we come across Lamech. And there was a footnote there for father of, or the ancestor of, and so throughout the verse. In other words, there is the possibility, as we get through these genealogies, that we're not reading an exact sequence of father and son, but rather of the people that the accounts were able to remember of the names of the various generations descended from Cain. And certainly this is a case of naming the names that lead us to the next person in the narrative, and not necessarily, clearly not the only child, and not necessarily even the oldest child, just the chain of descendants that gets us to this individual that is the point of the next part of the story. Because now we go back from genealogy to narrative. And I might mention this briefly here. There are going to be portions of the Old Testament, particularly when we get in sections of Leviticus or Deuteronomy or off into the books of Chronicles, that are going to be very hard to get through because there's not a lot to discuss. I mean, it's endless rules or it's genealogies. And most people, they hear genealogy and their eyes glaze over and their minds shut down. And while there are things that can be learned from genealogies, it's sometimes very hard to get through because of the very nature of the business. But anyway, so we have reached Lamech. Lamech married 2 women. Now, he was probably not the first polygamist, but he's the first one that gets mentioned. The first was named Ada, and the second was Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal, who was the first of those who raise livestock and live in tents. Well, why do you live in tents? Because tents. Yeah, that was that age's version of the mobile home. Exactly. It was so you could move about. So Jabal, like his great grandfather Cain, becomes a nomad. His brother's name was Jubal, the first of all who play the harp and flute. So these two brothers have different focuses for their lives. One goes on to live like his kind have lived, by raising livestock and living in tents. But Jubal, he becomes a musician. It suggests here that he was the first musician. I find that kind of hard to believe, but perhaps music up to that point had been limited to the human voice. And so Jubal becomes the one to invent musical instruments, objects that can make sounds that can then be tuned and used to produce melodies and so forth. So he became the first of all who use these instruments, who play them to produce pleasing sounds. Lamech's other wife, Zillah, gave birth to a son named Tubal-Cain. He became an expert in forging tools of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain had a sister named Naamah. Now there is the first mention in the Bible of a girl child. And it's in the genealogy of Cain, for whatever reason. Now, obviously, there have been women all along, not just the woman, Eve, but Cain had a wife, obviously. She's specifically mentioned here, though not by name. And we'll get into that in a moment. You were muffled when you started out. Try again.
Do you know yet who a Zelopony is?
Who?
You don't remember, do you?
No, I guess not. I couldn't understand what you said, so I don't know if I'd know or not. I didn't understand.
At a social, they played the game. We played the game. That you stick a Bible character's name written on a piece of paper, you tape it to somebody's back, and then others have to go around and talk to the people without telling them who's on the back. You have to go ask people questions to try and figure out who you have on your back.
Yeah, yes or no questions.
Yeah, and
kind of like the 20 questions game.
Pony on your back.
Okay, say that again so we can be sure we've got the name right.
Hazzellelpony.
Hazelopony.
Yeah.
Okay.
You'd never heard of it before. Have you figured it out yet?
No.
Okay.
I probably did it some. We're very good at talking at the same time. I'm waiting for you to say something. I give up and say something. And just as I'm saying something, you say it. And the phone mutes you because I'm talking. Try again.
Somebody's sister.
Okay. Can we wait until we get there and read it?
If you can find it.
Well, we'll run across it, won't we, as we read through the Old Testament?
I have no clue whose sister she is.
Oh, you don't remember.
No.
Well, you used the name in some stuff
But
that you...
anybody else we put on you would have figured out. It wouldn't be fair for you to put one on you and let you play the game unless we gave you something that you wouldn't have a chance of going.
In other words, they did it to me intentionally.
I did it to you intentionally.
Oh. So, where did...
You would figure it out.
Where did you find it?
It's in the Old Testament.
But you don't remember where.
It's in the genealogy. Somewhere.
Well, I've got a book over here. Let's see if I can look it up. Of course, this isn't exhaustive, so it might not have it, but...
Well, type it into the search engine on Bible Info. Is
Bible Gateway?
it wasn't like I was trying to cheat you out of winning. It's just that I couldn't think of anybody to put on there that you wouldn't automatically know. And there's a chance that you would have known this one.
Well, I suppose. I'm going to go get a different book. I'll be right back. By the way, folks, we're off on a tangent here.
Yeah.
Because we mentioned sister there, I guess, is how we got there.
I like having fun with my hubby.
Yeah. Now, did you say it's double Z?
HAZZELPONI.
Well, it's not even in this book, so it's going to take us a while to find it.
Well, I don't have a keyboard or I'd find it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, let's open up another window here.
E-L-E-L, okay.
Yeah, I've looked it up here. It's 1 Chronicles 4, verse 3. The descendants of Etam were Jezreel, Ishma, Idbash, their sister Hazelelponi, da-da-da-da, and so on and so forth.
There you go.
Yeah. The only thing is, out of context, we don't know who Edom was. We know there's a city in the Bible called Jezreel, but well.
Let's name our next daughter after her.
Well, in the thing that you wrote something for kids, and you were calling yourself Pony based on that name.
Based on that name.
Well, at any rate, we're down here to verse 22 and Tubal-Cain, and it says, he became an expert in forging tools of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain had a sister named Naamah. Again, I'll read that out of the New American Standard Bible. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And the name Naamah appears in the literature later. She was the queen mother in Judah at some point. One of them was Naamah. It's interesting that historians tend to speak of the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. And it is possible that there were cultures on Earth that used mostly bronze, and then later cultures that used mostly iron. But according to this verse, here we are 5 or 6 generations after Cain, and we have people who are experts in forging tools of bronze and iron. Now, the suggestion is, and we haven't really discussed this much yet, but there is an account coming up in Genesis of a worldwide flood, and that the flood put underground a lot of things that were on top of the ground in the earth, easy to get to, before the events of the flood. And we can talk about that more when we get to that part of the book of Genesis. So it may have been a lot easier in that day for them to get bronze and iron. Iron is a basic element. Bronze is an alloy, normally of copper and tin. You mix the two together and you get bronze, which is more useful than copper itself, which is rather soft. So we have this appearing in biblical record at the same time, not as separate eras in history. At any rate, then we get to verse 23, which gets us into a poem. Now, this is not the first poem in the Bible, but it is rendered poetically. One day, Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Listen to me, you wives of Lamech. I have killed a man who attacked me, a young man who wounded me. If someone who kills Cain is punished 7 times, then the one who kills me will be punished 77 times.
Well, that's different. Punished or avenged?
Well, yeah, God said that Cain would be avenged, but here Lamech is using the concept of punishment, which he probably got from Cain, because that's how Cain saw it. God said, here are the natural consequences of what you're doing, and Cain says, oh, you're punishing me too hard, I can't bear it. So, in that culture then, the descendants of Cain, punishment was the way they looked at anything negative that happened to them. And we're going to run into this in tomorrow's sermon presentation, where very often the human race has come to look at negative events that happen in our lives as a form of punishment from God because we've ticked him off. We've sinned. He doesn't like us. That's why he makes these bad things happen to us. When the fact is that bad things happen to us, bad things happen in this world because the world is messed up. The world is broken. There is sin here. There is evil present on this world, and we live on it. So evil causes bad things to happen, and those things happen just as the sunlight and the rain to good and bad alike. Now, God had said to Cain, I'm going to put a mark of protection on you. And if anyone should kill you, you'll be avenged 7 times over. Well, now, Lamech has committed a murder. Some young man apparently got mad at him and attacked him and wounded him. And in response, Lamech killed him. So now he is invoking the kind of protection that Cain received, only he's wanting it many times over. And different versions will render that differently. I think you're going to find that in the King James, let me look it up here, it's rendered... Oh, it isn't. Okay. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. So I was thinking maybe like in the New Testament, there's a difference between 77 and 70 times 7. But even the King James renders it there 70 and sevenfold, or times. Why would he be asking for even greater protection? Well, one picture that we get from this is that the society of Cain and his descendants had become an exceptionally violent society. And Lamech, in typical human fashion, out to survive, because that's the evolutionary imperative, is looking to have protection like God granted to Cain, only he wants it many times over the amount that Cain was protected by. And that's it. That poem ends right there. We read nothing more about the family of Cain or what happened to the people. We've read the entire account, and it ends right there at the end of Lamech's request for vengeance. And then we get into this other account. Adam had sexual relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to another son. She named him Seth. For she said, God has granted me another son in place of Abel, whom Cain killed. Seth probably means granted. The name may also mean appointed. When Seth grew up, he had a son and named him Enosh. At that time, people first began to worship Yahweh by name. We're out of time. I suppose we could talk for a long time about what was meant by that began to worship the Lord by name, because we normally say that name represents character. And so maybe it's saying that they began to worship the Lord according to his character. But given the progression of the earth, I find that a little hard to believe. So it's possible that just as Adam named the animals, and then once he believed serpents' lies, he named his wife, Now people have named God. They've given him a verbal label. They have reduced God, the Creator, in their estimation. He's no longer the Creator. He is a name we can say. Just a possibility for what that means. And like I say, it's past time we were supposed to complete here. In fact, it says here that we've been going for 2 hours. That doesn't sound right. Oh, yeah, we have. We've been going for over 2 hours. We're a half hour, more than a half hour over where we normally stop. Well, we apologize for going so long. We will remind you again that we do have the sermon presentation tomorrow at 11. Those don't generally go much over 45 or 50 minutes, so you won't have to bear up for so long. We've only done chapter 4, so next week we'll start at chapter 5. And so we will see you whenever you choose to come back, either tomorrow or next week, or whenever you choose to watch the next video, be it here in the group or on YouTube. And so we say until that time, goodbye and God bless.